A widowed black mom with twins was left with a $5 inheritance. Next day, the lawyer drove her to a hidden estate. $5. That's what the lawyer said my dead husband left me. $5 while his family laughed and called me a gold digger in a room full of vultures in designer suits. But the next morning, that same lawyer called with 3 words that made my blood stop. There's something else. Now I'm sitting in the back of his car driving towards something he won't explain, clutching a folder with my husband's handwriting that says, Legacy Fund, and I have no idea if I'm driving towards salvation or the trap that's going to destroy what's left of my life. Hey, friend. I know this story might hit close to home for some of you. If you're feeling it, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The lawyer's office felt like a tomb. Thomas Avery sat across from me in his tailored gray suit, his expression carefully neutral, like he'd practiced this exact face in the mirror. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, a view that costs more per month than I'd probably see in a year. Caleb shifted in the chair beside me, too mature for 7, his eyes darting between the check and my face. On my other side, Layla pressed into my arm, her small body trembling like she could absorb my pain if she just held on tight enough. Miss Carter, Thomas said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey, the estate has been distributed. This check represents your final remainder. He paused, and I swear I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Pity? Satisfaction? Marcus left no other assets in his name. No other assets. My chest constricted. 40 years old, my husband, dead from a heart attack that came out of nowhere. Marcus Carter, the man who'd promised me we were building something, who'd held our twins in the hospital and whispered about legacy and future and always. And this was what remained? I'm sorry you'll get so little. Thomas's words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. For 4 months since they'd lowered Marcus into the ground, I'd been holding myself together with duct tape and prayer, working double shifts at the diner, stretching every dollar until it screamed, believing that when this moment came, when the estate was finally settled, we'd at least have breathing room. Maybe not wealth, but something. Enough. $5. I'd watched Marcus's business associates claim equipment I didn't even know existed. I'd seen distant cousins I'd never met walk away with furniture, vehicles, investments. Each distribution another knife between my ribs. And for his children, his flesh and blood, his legacy, he'd left pocket change. $5, I whispered, and the words tasted like betrayal. Thomas shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. His fingers drummed once, twice against his desk before he seemed to make a decision. Miss Carter, there is, he cleared his throat. There's one additional matter. My head snapped up. Beside me, Caleb went completely still, that unnatural stillness of a child trying to disappear. Layla's grip on my arm tightened. What? The word came out sharper than I intended. Thomas reached for a folder on the edge of his desk, not the ones he'd been reading from, but something separate, bound with a rubber band that looked old and brittle. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Your husband left specific instructions. Documents that were to be presented to you separately from the will. Privately. My heart stuttered. Around us, the office seemed to shrink and expand simultaneously. What kind of documents? The kind, Thomas said slowly, his professional mask slipping to reveal something that looked almost like anticipation? That suggests Marcus Carter was far more strategic than anyone realized. I felt the air change. That moment when you're standing on the edge of something, and you can't tell if it's a cliff or a doorway. Thomas's expression had transformed. Gone was the condescending pity, replaced by a strange mixture of respect and something I couldn't quite name. Mommy? Layla's voice was so small. Can we go home now? Home. Our cramped two-bedroom apartment where the heater only worked in one room. Where Caleb did homework at the kitchen table because there wasn't space for a desk. Where I'd cried myself silent in the shower so my babies wouldn't hear their mother break. Mrs. Carter. Thomas stood, and for the first time, he called me Mrs. like I was someone who deserved the title. There's something I need to show you. Not here. It requires, he paused, choosing his words with surgical precision. It requires that we drive there. Now, if you're willing. Drive where? Suspicion crawled up my spine. Nothing in the last 4 months had been straightforward. Every door I'd hoped would open had slammed in my face. To a property. One that Marcus acquired years ago. One that, he stopped, shook his head. I think it's better if you see it for yourself. A property? My voice cracked. You just told me there were no assets. I said there were no assets in his name. Thomas's eyes held mine. I never said there was nothing. The distinction landed like thunder. Caleb's hand found mine, his palm sweaty and small. Layla had gone rigid against my side. Every instinct screamed this was a trap, another humiliation, one more way for the universe to crush what little hope I had left. But something else stirred beneath the fear, something that remembered Marcus in our kitchen, late at night, poring over documents he'd never quite explain. The way he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Trust me, Naomi. Just trust me." How far? I asked. 45 minutes outside the city. I looked down at the $5 check, still clutched in my left hand. Then at my children, my beautiful, patient, heartbroken children who deserved so much more than this. Let's go, I said. Thomas nodded, already reaching for his keys. As we stood, he added quietly, almost as an afterthought. Miss Carter, you might want to hold on to that check. Something tells me you'll want to remember this day exactly as it started. His words felt like prophecy, like warning, like promise. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I am and how I ended up in that office, clutching a $5 insult while my whole world tilted on its axis. My name is Naomi Carter, and for the last 4 months, I believed my life was over. Widow. That's what they called me now, like it was my whole identity. Not Naomi who used to laugh so hard she'd snort. Not the woman who could make a meal out of nothing and call it gourmet. Just widow. 35 years old, and somehow I'd become invisible, except when people wanted to pity me or, worse, judge me for not grieving the right way. Marcus died on a Tuesday. Heart attack at 40. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. 1 minute, he was kissing me at the door, promising to pick up milk on the way home. The next, I was identifying his body in a morgue that smelled like industrial cleaner and death. The twins were 6 then. Now they're 7, but they've aged decades and months. Caleb stopped crying after the funeral. Just stopped, like someone flipped a switch. Now he watches me with these ancient eyes, always checking if I'm about to shatter. Layla's the opposite. She cries for both of them, sudden storms that come out of nowhere and leave her gasping. I kept us alive on Marcus's life insurance, barely. It covered the funeral, 2 months of rent, and then evaporated like it was never there. After that came the scraping, double shifts at the diner, bills sorted into critical and, eventually, dinners that were 60% rice and 40% hope. And through it all, I waited. Waited for the estate to settle. For the lawyer to call. For Marcus's plans, whatever they were, to catch us before we hit the ground. That $5 check? That was the ground. I didn't sleep that night after leaving Thomas's office. Couldn't. I lay in bed listening to the radiator clink and the neighbors argue through walls thin as paper, turning everything over in my mind. There's something I need to show you. A property. One that Marcus acquired years ago. The words felt like riddles. Marcus and I shared everything, or so I thought. Joint bank account, shared dreams, late-night talks about building something bigger than ourselves. When had he acquired property? With what money? And why, in God's name, would he keep it secret? Unless he didn't trust me. The thought landed like a stone in my chest. Maybe I'd been the fool all along. Maybe the $5 wasn't an insult. Maybe it was the truth. Maybe I'd married a stranger who'd played me perfectly, and I'd been too in love to notice. At 6:47 a.m., my phone screamed to life. I grabbed it before it could wake the twins, my heart already racing. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Carter. Thomas Avery. His voice was too smooth for this hour, too practiced. Like he'd been rehearsing. I apologize for the early call. There's been a development. Development. The word people use when they don't want to say problem. What kind of development? I kept my voice low, sliding out of bed and into the hallway. I need to clarify something from yesterday's meeting. A pause, deliberate and weighted. There's more to discuss. Can you come to my office? My first thought was guilt. He'd made a mistake. Mixed up the files. Given me someone else's insulting inheritance, and now he had to correct the record. Probably I was owed even less. When? My throat was dry. This morning. As soon as possible. I have children, Mr. Avery. I can't just. I understand. But Ms. Carter, Naomi, the use of my first name stopped me cold. This is time-sensitive. And I believe you'll want to hear what I have to say. Something in his tone had shifted from yesterday's cool professionalism. Now he sounded almost urgent, like he was standing on the edge of something too. 1 hour, I said. I need to get my kids sorted. 1 hour. I'll be waiting. He hung up before I could change my mind. Caleb and Layla got cereal. Not the good kind with marshmallows, but the generic flakes that tasted like cardboard and disappointment. I poured the milk, the last of it, and watched them eat in silence, both of them sensing something was wrong but too afraid to ask. Mommy has to go out for a bit, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. Mrs. Chin next door will check on you, okay? Where are you going? Caleb's spoon paused midair. Just an appointment. About grown-up stuff. About Daddy? Layla's voice was so small. I knelt beside her chair, brushed a braid back from her face. Yeah, baby. About Daddy. She nodded like she understood, but how could she? I didn't even understand. The bus ride downtown felt eternal. 43 minutes of my mind spinning worst-case scenarios. He's taking back the $5. There's a debt. Marcus was into something illegal. We're going to lose everything, even the nothing we have. Thomas's office building loomed like a glass cathedral. I rode the elevator to the 12th floor, my reflection staring back at me from mirrored walls. Wrinkled dress, hair that needed doing, exhaustion carved into every line of my face. The receptionist recognized me this time. Ms. Carter, Mr. Avery is expecting you. His office door was open. He stood when I entered, and something was different. Yesterday's condescension had vanished, replaced by something I couldn't read. Anticipation? Nervousness? Thank you for coming. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. He sat. Waited. Watched him take a breath like he was steadying himself. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Not new and crisp like yesterday's files, but old. Dusty. The edges worn soft with time. And on the front, in handwriting I'd know anywhere, Marcus's careful, deliberate script, 3 words. The Legacy Fund. My heart stopped. Started. Stopped again. What is that? I whispered. Thomas placed it in front of me like it might explode. This is what Marcus left for you. The real inheritance. But you said, yesterday you said. I said what the will instructed me to say. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like respect there. The $5 was part of the plan. A test, if you will, to see how you'd handle it, how you'd carry yourself when there was nothing. Rage and confusion warred in my chest. A test. Marcus was strategic. Thomas opened the folder carefully. He wanted to ensure that when you received this, you'd be ready. that you'd understand its weight. Inside were documents, property deeds, account numbers, a letter with my name across the envelope, sealed with wax like something from another century. There's a property, Thomas said quietly. And estate, actually. It's been held in trust for 4 months, waiting. Marcus wanted you to see it yourself, to stand in it before you knew what it was worth. My hands trembled as I reached for the folder. Where? Outside the city. 45 minutes. He pulled car keys from his pocket. I can drive you now if you're willing. Why didn't he tell me? The question burst out. Why all this secrecy? Why make me think? My voice cracked. Why let me believe he'd abandoned us? Thomas's expression softened. I think Marcus wanted you to know your own strength first. Before the money. Before the property. Before everything changed. He paused. He wrote something in the files. She needs to know she can stand in the fire. Because what comes next will test her in ways neither of us can imagine. The room tilted. Outside the windows, the city hummed with life. People who had no idea that my entire reality was restructuring itself around this dusty folder and a dead man's faith in me. Okay, I heard myself say, let's go. But even as I stood, as Thomas gathered his things and led me toward the door, I felt it, the weight of eyes I couldn't see. The sense that Marcus had set something in motion, and I was only just beginning to understand the game. Trust him, I'd told myself for months ago at his funeral. Now I was about to find out if that trust had been earned, or if it would destroy me. Thomas's car was the kind that whispered wealth, leather seats that sighed when you sat down, dashboard that looked like a spaceship, silence, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. He'd insisted I sit in the back, said it was protocol for client transport, but I knew better. He wanted distance. Wanted me to feel the separation between his world and mine. I didn't argue, just slid into the back seat and watched the city start to peel away. First went the skyscrapers, those glass giants that scraped heaven and reflected everything back at you, including your own smallness. Then the office buildings, the corporate parks with their manicured lawns and flags snapping in the wind. The busy intersections where I'd waited for buses in the rain, where I'd counted change for fare, where I'd pretended not to see people pretending not to see me. Thomas didn't make small talk. Just drove with the GPS murmuring directions in a voice too calm for what I was feeling. I watched him in the rearview mirror, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the road like he was delivering something fragile. Or dangerous. The suburbs came next. Cookie-cutter houses with 2-car garages and basketball hoops in driveways. Swing sets in backyards. Lives that looked simple from the outside, like happiness was just a matter of having enough square footage and good schools. Marcus and I used to drive through neighborhoods like this, dreaming out loud. One day, he'd say, squeezing my hand, one day, Naomi, we'll have a yard big enough for the kids to get lost in.
Idalauga.
Called him a dreamer, kissed him, and said I didn't need a mansion, just him. Turns out, I might have been wrong about what he could give me. The suburbs thinned. Houses spread farther apart, separated by actual land now instead of property lines barely wide enough for a lawnmower. Trees appeared, not the decorative kind planted by city planners, but real ones. Old ones. The kind that had been here long before any of us decided to build around them. My reflection stared back at me from the tinted window. Dark skin, darker eyes, exhaustion etched into every angle. I looked like someone who'd been surviving instead of living. When had that happened? When had I stopped being Naomi and become just endurance? Marcus used to trace my face at night, his fingers memorizing the shape of my cheekbones, the curve of my jaw. You're beautiful, he'd whisper. Don't ever forget that. But beauty doesn't pay rent, doesn't feed children, doesn't answer the question that had been eating me alive since yesterday. What secrets did you keep, Marcus? The trees grew thicker. Branches arched over the road now, creating a tunnel of green and shadow. Sunlight filtered through in scattered coins, turning everything golden and unreal. The GPS said we had 15 minutes left, but it felt like we were driving out of time itself, into some pocket dimension where the rules were different. Ms. Carter. Thomas's voice startled me. First words in 30 minutes. Did Marcus ever mention his family's history to you? His family? I leaned forward. He said they were from the South originally. Virginia, maybe? He didn't talk about them much. Virginia, yes. Thomas's eyes found mine in the mirror. Old Virginia. The kind of old that comes with complications. Complications. Another careful word. Another dodge. What kind of complications? He didn't answer immediately. Just took a turn onto a narrower road. This one barely paved. More suggestion than certainty. The kind that make a man want to protect what's his. At any cost. My stomach tightened. You're not making sense. I know. He almost smiled. Marcus said you'd hate the mystery. Said you were the kind of woman who needed straight answers. His smile faded. But some answers can only be understood when you're standing in the middle of them. The road curved. Climbed. The trees here were ancient. Oaks with trunks wide as cars. Branches that could have sheltered generations. And then, through the leaves, I saw it. A gate. Not some flimsy chain-link thing, but wrought iron. 10 feet tall, maybe 12. Intricate metalwork that must have taken someone months to forge. Patterns that looked almost like family crests or warnings. Stone pillars flanked either side, weathered but solid. The kind of stone that laughed at time. Thomas slowed. Pressed something on his visor. The gate shuddered, then swung open with a groan that sounded like it was waking up after a long sleep. We drove through. My breath caught. The driveway stretched ahead, lined with more of those massive oaks. Spanish moss hung from branches like curtains, swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel from inside the car. The pavement was old brick, laid in patterns that reminded me of something. European, maybe? Or just wealthy, in a way I'd never encountered. And then the house appeared. No. Not a house. A mansion. 3 stories of old stone, the color of thunderclouds and permanence. Ivy climbed the walls like it had been negotiating territory for decades, dark green against gray. Windows, so many windows, caught the afternoon light and threw it back like challenges. A wraparound porch with columns that could have held up a courthouse. Chimneys that suggested fireplaces big enough to stand in. It looked like history. Like money that had forgotten what it was like to be earned. Like the kind of place that would show up in documentaries about American dynasties or Southern Gothic novels. It looked like it belonged to someone else. Not me. Never me. Thomas pulled up to the front steps and killed the engine. The silence rushed in, louder than the car had ever been. What is this? My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. He turned in his seat, and for the first time since I'd met him, Thomas Avery's professional mask cracked completely. What showed underneath was something like wonder. Or maybe envy. This, he said quietly, is the Carter estate. Purchased by Marcus's great-grandfather in 1924. Passed down through the male line for generations. And, as of 4 months ago, held in trust for you and your children. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Marcus grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment. We'd met when I was waitressing and he was working construction, both of us scraping by, both of us dreaming of something better. He never mentioned mansions. Never mentioned estates or great-grandfathers or trusts. This isn't. I shook my head. Marcus would have told me. Marcus kept it secret for the same reason his father kept it secret from him until he turned 25. Thomas opened his door, stepped out. Open mine. Because power like this attracts predators. And he wanted you to be ready. I got out on shaking legs. The air here smelled different, cleaner, greener, like it had been filtered through centuries of trees. Birds sang in languages I'd never learned. Somewhere distant, I heard water moving. The house loomed above us, patient and permanent. Waiting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter," Thomas said, and for once, for the first time since I'd met him, his smugness was gone entirely. He sounded almost reverent. I stood there, this widow in a wrinkled dress, this woman who'd been counting pennies and stretching miracles, and stared at a building that couldn't possibly be mine. But Marcus's handwriting was in that folder. Marcus's plan had brought me here. Marcus, who'd kissed me goodbye on a Tuesday and died before coming home, had left me this. A test, Thomas had said, to see if I could stand in the fire. I looked up at the mansion, at ivy and stone and history I didn't understand, and felt the flames start to gather. "Show me," I whispered. Thomas smiled and led me toward the door. The door opened without a sound. That should have been my first clue, that a house this old, this heavy with history, didn't creak or groan or announce your arrival. Someone had maintained it, oiled the hinges, kept the ghosts quiet. Thomas stepped aside, letting me enter first. "Take your time," he said, like I was visiting a museum. Like this wasn't supposed to be mine. I crossed the threshold. The foyer stole my breath. Marble floors, real marble, the kind with veins of gold running through white stone like frozen lightning. A staircase curved upward to my left, dark wood so polished it looked wet. Crown molding that must have taken craftsmen months to carve. And above it all, a chandelier that caught the afternoon light filtering through stained glass windows and scattered it into 1,000 colored prayers across the walls. But it was the portrait that stopped me. Directly across from the entrance, mounted above a fireplace you could park a car in, hung a painting. Oil on canvas, the kind that cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. And staring out from the gilt frame, serious and young and so achingly familiar, was Marcus. Not my Marcus. Not the man who died at 40 with laugh lines and gray starting at his temples. This Marcus was maybe 25, dressed in a suit that looked like it came from another era. His hand rested on the back of a chair, his expression caught between pride and something else. Burden maybe. Or knowledge. That was painted when he inherited, Thomas said quietly behind me. Family tradition. Every Carter man sits for a portrait when the estate passes to him. I moved closer, my footsteps echoing. Touched the frame. He never told me. He wasn't supposed to. Thomas's voice was gentle now, like he was explaining something to a child. The estate comes with rules, Mrs. Carter. Old rules. One of them is silence until the time is right. I tore my eyes from Marcus's painted face and looked at Thomas. "And when was the right time?" "When you were strong enough to carry it." The words landed like an accusation and a benediction all at once. I turned away, moved deeper into the house. Through an arched doorway into what must have been a sitting room, more portraits here, faces I didn't know but should have. Marcus's father, maybe. His grandfather. A whole lineage of men who'd kept this secret, passed it down like a test each generation had to survive. To the right, another door. I pushed it open and stopped breathing. A library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, dark wood, the smell of old paper and leather and time. Thousands of books, some so old their spines had faded to whispers. A rolling ladder attached to brass rails. Reading chairs positioned by windows that overlooked grounds I hadn't seen yet. And in the center, a massive mahogany desk. Marcus's desk. I knew it without being told. Could feel his presence here stronger than anywhere else, like he'd just stepped out for coffee and would be back any minute. I walked to it slowly, my hand trailing along the chair back. Sat down in his seat. The leather was worn in places, shaped by his body, by hours he'd spent here doing what? Planning? Dreaming? Keeping secrets from his wife. He worked here every time he visited, Thomas said from the doorway. Usually alone. Sometimes for days. Visited. I looked up. How often? Once a month. Sometimes more. Thomas moved into the room, his footsteps careful, like he was walking through a church. He'd tell you he was traveling for work, I assume? The construction jobs. The site visits that kept him away for weekends. The times he'd come home exhausted but somehow lighter, like he'd been carrying something and finally set it down. I'd believed him. Every time. Every lie. What was he doing here? My voice cracked. Thomas moved to a shelf, pulled down a leather-bound journal, placed it on the desk in front of me. See for yourself. I opened it with shaking hands. Marcus's handwriting filled the pages. Dates, notes, plans, sketches of buildings, budget projections. And at the top of the first page, underlined 3 times, the Marcus Carter Foundation, a legacy for those left behind. My vision blurred. I flipped through pages, proposals for a community center, outreach programs for widows, educational trusts for fatherless children, detailed plans for converting the estate's guest wing into housing, partnerships with local schools. Everything mapped out with the same careful precision Marcus brought to building houses, except this time he was building something bigger. He was building a future. For people like me. For people like our children would have been if he'd left us with nothing. Oh, God, I whispered. Thomas pulled another journal. And another. Years of planning, all hidden here. Letters from organizations he'd contacted. Responses from community leaders. Legal documents establishing the foundation's framework. And woven through it all, my name. Over and over. Naomi will understand. Naomi will carry this forward. Naomi is stronger than she knows. The sob hit me like a fist. I pressed one hand over my mouth, the other flat against the mahogany desk where Marcus's hand had rested while he wrote these words. While he built this dream he never told me about. While he prepared me for a loss I didn't know was coming. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known his time was short. Had felt it in his chest, maybe, in the heart that would betray him. And instead of telling me, instead of spending his last months making me afraid, he'd done this. Built me a fortress. Given me a purpose. Left me the tools to become someone I never imagined. I cried quietly, trying to muffle the sound, but Thomas heard. He didn't move closer. Just waited, giving me space to break and reassemble myself in this room that smelled like my husband's aftershave and ambition. When I could breathe again, I looked up. Why the $5? Why make me think he'd abandoned us? Thomas's expression was complicated. Because the foundation comes with conditions, Mrs. Carter. Significant ones. Marcus needed to know you could stand on nothing before he gave you everything. He pulled another folder from inside his jacket, thicker than the first. These are the terms of the trust. My stomach dropped. Of course there were terms. Nothing this big came free. He opened the folder. To inherit the full estate and access the foundation's resources, you must fulfill 3 requirements. He paused, and I saw something flash across his face. Concern, maybe, or warning. First, you must establish and personally oversee the Marcus Carter Community Center within 6 months. Provide housing, education, and resources to widows and children in need. I nodded slowly. That I could do. That I wanted to do. Second, you must remain living on the property for a minimum of 5 years, serving as the foundation's director. 5 years. Here. In this house that felt like Marcus's ghost watching my every move. Okay. And third, Thomas's voice dropped. You cannot sell, transfer, or abandon the property under any circumstances. If you walk away, everything reverts to the Carter family's distant relatives. People who, he stopped himself. People who would not honor Marcus's vision. The room suddenly felt colder. Smaller. Like the walls were listening. Who are these relatives? That, Thomas said carefully, brings me to the complication I mentioned in the car. He pulled out one more document. Marcus's cousin, Desmond Carter, has already been notified of your inheritance. By law, we had to inform all potential claimants. His eyes met mine. He's contested the will. Claims the estate should pass through the male bloodline, not to a spouse. Especially not. He didn't finish.
Didn't have to.
Especially not a black woman who married into the family. The words hung between us, unspoken but deafening. I looked down at Marcus's journal, at his careful handwriting, at the foundation he'd built with my name woven through every page. Looked at the portrait in the foyer, at the desk where he'd sat planning our future, at the library filled with knowledge he'd wanted me to inherit. Then I looked at Thomas. When does Desmond arrive? Thomas checked his watch. He's been notified you're here. A car door slammed outside. His face went pale.
Now.
The footsteps on the porch were deliberate. Heavy. The kind that announced arrival like a declaration of war. Thomas moved to the window, peered through the curtain, then turned back to me with an expression I couldn't read. Mrs. Carter, perhaps we should discuss the terms more thoroughly before. The front door burst open.
No knack. No courtesy.
Just the sudden invasion of a man who believed he had every right to be here. More right than me. He filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car. Sandy brown hair slicked back, jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes that swept the foyer with the possessive gaze of someone cataloging their inheritance. His eyes landed on me. Narrowed. You must be Naomi. Not Mrs. Carter. Not even a polite introduction. Just my first name, stripped of title, of respect, of everything Marcus had tried to give me. I stood slowly from Marcus's desk, keeping the mahogany between us like a barrier. And you must be Desmond. Desmond Carter. He stepped inside, uninvited, his shoes clicking against marble that suddenly felt less like mine and more like contested territory. The actual blood heir to this estate. Thomas moved between us, his professional mask snapping back into place. Mr. Carter, this is highly irregular. We have protocols for... Protocols? Desmond's laugh was ugly. My cousin dies, and 6 months later he paused, choosing his word like a weapon. Widow shows up to claim everything our family built? That's what's irregular, counselor. The way he said widow made it sound like an insult. Like I'd killed Marcus myself just to get here. The will is legally binding, Thomas said, his voice steel now. Marcus made his intentions explicitly clear. Mrs. Carter inherits provided she meets the Foundation's requirements. Requirements. Desmond moved closer, and I could smell his cologne. Expensive, aggressive, meant to dominate. You mean the charity project my cousin dreamed up? The community center for, his eyes raked over me. People who need saving? There it was. Not even hidden. Just naked contempt wrapped in expensive fabric. I felt something shift inside me. Some part that had been bending under grief and poverty and humiliation suddenly went rigid. Refused to break. The Marcus Carter Foundation, I said quietly, is designed to provide housing, education, and resources to widows and fatherless children. To give people a second chance when the world tells them they're worth nothing. I paused, held his gaze. Kind of like someone handing you a $5 check and expecting you to disappear. His jaw tightened. But legacy isn't built on charity, sweetheart. It's built on blood. Family. Things you wouldn't understand. Desmond. Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. That's enough. But Desmond wasn't done. He pulled papers from his jacket, legal documents, thick and official-looking. Slapped them on the desk between us. Contest of will. My lawyers have already filed. This estate has been in the Carter family for 100 years. It's not about to be given away to some. He stopped himself. But we all heard what he didn't say. The silence stretched, ugly and sharp. Thomas picked up the papers, scanned them, and I watched his face shift from anger to something like grim satisfaction. Mr. Carter, this contest is built on the assumption that the estate passes through traditional inheritance. It doesn't. He pulled out another document, the one he'd been trying to show me before Desmond arrived. Marcus established the foundation as a separate legal entity 5 years ago. The estate doesn't pass through his will. It transfers to the foundation's director upon his death. And who's the director? Desmond's voice was dangerous now. Thomas looked at me. Mrs. Naomi Carter. Provided she accepts the position and fulfills its requirements within 6 months. The room tilted. Everything suddenly came into focus. Why Marcus had hidden this, why he'd structured it so carefully, why he needed me to be strong first. This wasn't just an inheritance.
It was a job.
A calling. A mission that came with a target on my back from people like Desmond, who'd rather see it burn than let me have it. The requirements, I said slowly. Tell me all of them. Thomas nodded, grateful I was asking. He opened the folder completely, spread documents across Marcus's desk. Within 6 months, you must establish the Marcus Carter Community Center and accept your first residents. Create an educational trust fund for underprivileged children with clear operational guidelines. Develop a widow's housing program with at least 3 families placed. He looked up. And you must live on the property as the foundation's director for a minimum of 5 years, personally overseeing all operations. 6 months. 1 woman. 3 massive programs. While people like Desmond fought me every step. And if I can't, then the estate reverts to the Carter Family Trust. Thomas glanced at Desmond, which would place it under the control of the next living male heir. Desmond smiled. It was the ugliest thing I'd seen all day. You don't have to accept, Thomas said quietly, and I heard something in his voice. Almost like hope. Hope that I'd walk away. Save myself. Go back to my small apartment and my small life and let these people with their old money and older prejudices keep their world exactly as it was. But I was looking at the journals on the desk, at Marcus's handwriting, at the blueprints he'd drawn for the community center. Careful sketches showing rooms for classes, spaces for counseling, a kitchen big enough to feed dozens. At the list of widows' names he'd already compiled, women he'd never met but wanted to help. At my name, written over and over in the margins. Naomi will know what to do. Naomi is stronger than they think. Naomi will finish this. I thought about Caleb and Layla, eating generic cereal in our cramped apartment. About the nights I'd cried in the shower so they wouldn't hear. About the $5 check and the lawyer who'd handed it to me like a dismissal. About every time someone had looked at me and seen less. I picked up the pen. What are you doing? Desmond's voice went sharp. Accepting. I found the signature line. Pressed the pen to paper. I'm accepting the position of director. All of it. The requirements, the timeline, the mission. I signed my name, Naomi Elizabeth Carter, in script that didn't shake even though my heart was racing. We'll stay. You're insane, Desmond hissed. You'll fail. You'll lose everything, and when I do, I interrupted, looking up at him. At least I'll have tried. Which is more than Marcus thought you'd ever do. His face went red. For a second, I thought he might actually lunge across the desk. But Thomas stepped between us again, taking the signed document with something like awe in his expression. It's done, Thomas said. Mrs. Carter is now the legal director of the Marcus Carter Foundation and resident of this estate. Mr. Carter, I suggest you leave. Desmond stared at me for a long moment, then smiled again, colder this time, more calculating. 6 months, he said softly. That's all you have. And I'll be watching every mistake, every failure, every time you prove you don't belong here. He turned, started toward the door, then paused. You know what the worst part is? Marcus knew this would destroy you, and he did it anyway. The door slammed behind him. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Thomas let out a breath. Mrs. Carter, I should tell you. Call my children, I said. My voice was steady now.
Sure.
Call Mrs. Chun. Tell her to bring Caleb and Layla here.
Now.
Are you certain? This is a lot too. They should see their home. I walked to the window, looked out at grounds that stretched farther than I could see. They should know what their father built for them. An hour later, I heard the car pull up. Heard Mrs. Chen's nervous chatter. Heard 2 sets of small feet on the front steps. Then Caleb and Layla burst through the door. They stopped in the foyer, eyes wide, mouths open, staring at the chandelier, the staircase, the portrait of their father looking down at them like a blessing. "Mommy," Layla's voice was tiny. "Where are we?" I knelt down, pulled them both close. "Home, baby. We're home. This is ours." Caleb's ancient eyes searched mine for the catch, the mistake, the moment it would all disappear. "It's ours." I kissed his forehead. "And we're going to do something amazing here. Something your daddy dreamed about." Layla broke away first, started running. Through the foyer, into the sitting room, her footsteps echoing like laughter. Caleb followed, slower, but I saw it. The first real smile I'd seen from him since the funeral. They ran through the house like it had always been theirs. And I stood in Marcus's library, surrounded by his plans and his faith in me, and whispered to his ghost, "I won't let you down." The house seemed to whisper back, "I know." The first 3 days in the house felt like living inside someone else's dream. Caleb and Layla explored every room like archaeologists discovering a lost civilization. They found a conservatory with plants that had been growing wild for months, a ballroom with floors so polished they could slide across in socks, and a third-floor tower room that Layla immediately claimed as her princess office. I spent those days reading Marcus's journals, learning the foundation's plans, calling the organizations he'd already contacted. Every page revealed another layer of the husband I thought I'd known, the one who'd kissed me goodbye every morning and kept an entire empire secret. Thomas visited daily, bringing documents, answering questions, treating me less like a charity case and more like a colleague. Almost like he respected what I was trying to do. Almost like he believed I could actually pull it off. On the 4th morning, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching. Multiple cars. Voices carrying through the early air, male, angry, and too close to the house. I threw on Marcus's old robe, the one I'd found in the master bedroom closet that still smelled like him, and ran downstairs. Through the front windows, I could see them. 3 black SUVs parked in a semicircle, like they were preparing for a siege. Men in expensive suits stood by the vehicles, talking in tight clusters. And at the center of it all, Desmond Carter. He looked different in daylight. Harder. The charming veneer from our first meeting had cracked completely, revealing something raw and furious underneath. He was pointing at the house, gesturing broadly, and the men around him nodded like disciples receiving scripture. My phone buzzed. "Thomas, don't go outside. I'm 10 minutes away." But Desmond had already seen me in the window. His eyes locked on mine, and he smiled, the kind of smile that promised violence wrapped in legality. He started walking toward the house. I didn't wait for him to knock. Opened the door before he could claim the power of forcing entry. Stood on my porch, and met his approach with my spine straight and Marcus's robe wrapped around me like armor. "Mrs. Carter." He stopped at the bottom of the steps, his entourage fanning out behind him. "We need to talk." So talk. I didn't invite him in. Didn't move. Just waited. He climbed 2 steps. Close enough now that I could see the bloodshot in his eyes, smell the coffee on his breath. Close enough to intimidate. "You've had your fun playing house. Now it's time to be realistic." Realistic about what?
About this.
He gestured at the estate behind me. "This property has been in the Carter family for over a century. It's not some charity project for you to experiment with. It's legacy.
History.
Blood." There was that word again.
Blood.
Like DNA was currency. Like family trees could be weaponized. "Marcus's blood runs through my children," I said quietly. "That makes them Carter family too." Half. The word was a slap. They're half Carter. The rest is He paused, and I watched him calculate how much he could say without the witnesses behind him recording his racism. Uncertain lineage. My fingers curled into fists inside the robe's pockets. Get off my property. Your property? He laughed, bitter and sharp. Sweetheart, you don't own this. You're a placeholder. A temporary inconvenience that Marcus created because he was thinking with something other than his brain when he married you. One of the men behind him shifted uncomfortably. Even his allies knew he'd crossed a line. The foundation is legally binding, I said, forcing my voice steady. Thomas explained. Thomas Avery is a mid-level attorney who handled my cousin's paperwork. He's not God. Desmond climbed another step. I have real lawyers. The kind who specialize in overturning questionable trusts. The kind who know how to prove undue influence, mental incapacity, fraud. Marcus wasn't mentally incapacitated. He was brilliant. Was he? Desmond's smile turned cruel. Because a brilliant man doesn't leave a 100-year-old estate to a waitress with no education, no experience, and no right to be here. He reached into his jacket. For a heartbeat, I thought gun. My body tensed, prepared to run, to scream for the twins, too. But what he pulled out was worse than a weapon. It was the $5 check. He held it up like evidence, like proof of my worthlessness made tangible. This, he said softly, was all Marcus thought you were worth. The real inheritance. The truth. Everything else? That's just him trying to make himself feel better about marrying down. The words hit like stones, each one carefully aimed to wound. Where did you get that? My voice came out strangled. Does it matter? He waved it slightly, letting morning light catch the signatures. Marcus's careful handwriting next to the estate attorney's seal. This is what you earned. $5 for 5 years of, what did you call it? Love. He laughed. But you got greedy. Saw an opportunity. Manipulated a dying man. He wasn't dying when he set up the foundation. The words burst out. He established it 5 years ago. Thomas showed me the documents. Marcus planned this long before. Before what? Before his convenient heart attack. Desmond's voice dropped to something dangerous. Funny how a healthy 40-year-old just drops dead right after signing over everything to his charity case wife. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Behind him, one of the men cleared his throat. Desmond, maybe. Maybe nothing. Desmond didn't look away from me. I'm saying what everyone's thinking. What the whole family whispered at the funeral. How convenient that Marcus died before he could change his mind. You think I killed him? I could barely breathe. You think I think the timing is interesting. I think a lot of things about this situation are interesting. And I think a thorough investigation would find them interesting too. A car roared up the driveway. Thomas's sedan, moving too fast, gravel sprang. He parked at an angle and was out before the engine stopped, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. Desmond, get the hell off this property right now. Or what? Desmond turned, still holding the check like a talisman. You'll call the police? Tell them I'm harassing the woman who inherited millions after my cousin mysteriously died. Thomas climbed the steps, positioned himself between us. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw real steel in the man. Not the polished professional. The warrior underneath. The trust is airtight, Thomas said, his voice carrying to all the witnesses Desmond had brought. Every document is legally sound. Filed properly. Notarized. Marcus was examined by 3 independent physicians who declared him of sound mind and body at the time of signing. He pulled out his phone, started recording. Unless you'd like to contest it publicly, go on record accusing Mrs. Carter of murder? Because I'm sure the media would be very interested in the Carter family trying to deny a widow her legal inheritance. Especially when that widow is black and the family is. He paused deliberately. Not. The men behind Desmond shifted. Exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. Desmond's face went purple. You're threatening me? I'm informing you of consequences. Thomas stepped closer. Mrs. Carter has 6 months to fulfill the Foundation's requirements. During that time, if you harass her, threaten her, or attempt to interfere with her work, I will personally ensure you face legal action for obstruction, intimidation, and conspiracy to defraud. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. And unlike you, Desmond, I actually passed the bar. For a long moment, no one moved. The morning air felt electric, dangerous, like lightning deciding where to strike. Then Desmond descended the steps slowly. But at the bottom, he turned back to me, held up the $5 check one more time. You have 6 months, Naomi. 6 months to prove you can run a foundation, manage this estate, and be what Marcus thought you could be. He tucked the check back in his jacket, over his heart. And when you fail, when you inevitably fail because people like you always do, this check is all you'll have left. This and the memory of thinking you belonged somewhere you never did. He walked to his car. His entourage followed, climbing into their SUVs like an army in retreat. But before he drove away, he rolled down his window. By the way, he called out, his voice carrying across the morning. I've already contacted the families on Marcus's widow outreach list. Told them about the Foundation's uncertain future. Suggested they might want to seek more stable assistance elsewhere. The words hit like a gut punch. Those families were the Foundation's first residents. The women Marcus had wanted to help most. And Desmond had poisoned that well before I'd even started. The SUVs pulled away, leaving gouges in the gravel like scars. Thomas turned to me, his recording still running. Are you okay? I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. My whole body was shaking. But underneath the fear, underneath the rage, something else was building. Determination. The kind that burns. No, I said honestly. But I will be. Inside the house, I heard small footsteps. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his ancient eyes taking in the scene, the tire tracks, Thomas's protective stance, my trembling hands. Mommy, his voice was small. Is the bad man going to take our house? I knelt down, pulled him close. Felt Layla emerge from behind him to wrap her arms around us both. No, baby. I kissed his forehead. Nobody's taking our house. Nobody's taking what Daddy built. I looked up at Thomas, at the mansion behind us, at the empire Marcus had left in my uncertain hands. We're going to finish what he started, no matter what it takes. Caleb nodded against my shoulder. Okay, Mommy. But as I held my children on the porch of our contested home, I couldn't stop seeing Desmond smile. Or the $5 check he'd kept like a promise. 6 months, he'd said. The clock was already ticking. The smell of smoke woke me. Not the cozy kind from fireplaces or birthday candles. This was acrid, chemical wrong. It crawled through the crack under my bedroom door at 2:47 a.m. and pulled me from dreams where Marcus was still alive, and none of this was real. I was running before I was fully awake, my bare feet slapping against hardwood. Down the hall to the twins' rooms, Caleb first, then Layla. Both still sleeping, thank God. No smoke here yet. I shook them awake, trying not to let panic bleed into my voice. Get up.
Now.
We need to go outside. Mommy? Layla's voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? Just move, baby.
Quick.
Caleb was already pulling on shoes, that terrible maturity kicking in. He grabbed Layla's hand while I grabbed my phone, and we ran down the grand staircase that suddenly felt like it went on forever. Through the foyer where Marcus's portrait watched us flee. Out the front door into night air that tasted like autumn and ash. Behind the house, flames painted the sky orange. The barn. The old structure Marcus had mentioned once in passing, said it used to house horses back when his great-grandfather ran the estate like a gentleman's farm. Now it was burning like a sacrifice, flames reaching 20 feet high, sparks spiraling into the darkness like angry stars. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. Fire. The Carter estate on Millbrook Road. There's a barn. We've already received the call, ma'am. Trucks are en route. Already received the call, which meant someone else had seen it first. Had maybe even said it. The twins pressed against me, Layla crying silently, Caleb's jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. We stood on the front lawn in our pajamas and watched something that had stood for nearly a century be devoured in minutes. The fire trucks arrived with sirens that split the night. Firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, unwinding hoses, shouting coordinates. But I could see it in their body language. They were containing it, not saving it. The barn was already gone. By dawn, only the skeleton remained. Blackened beams jutting up like broken ribs. Smoke still rising in lazy spirals. And the fire chief, a woman with gray streaks in her ponytail and eyes that had seen too much, standing on my porch asking questions. Any idea how it started, Mrs. Carter?
No.
I was asleep. Electrical in the barn? I don't think so. It wasn't being used for anything. She exchanged a glance with her deputy. We found accelerant. Multiple points of origin. She let that sink in. This wasn't an accident. The words landed like stones. Accelerant. Multiple points. Someone had planned this. Do you have any enemies, ma'am? Anyone who might want to damage your property? I almost laughed. Enemies. I'd inherited enemies along with the estate. But saying Desmond's name meant accusations, investigations, making this bigger than I could handle right now. I'm new to the area, I said carefully. I can't imagine who. Mrs. Carter. The fire chief's voice gentled. This is arson. Someone came onto your property in the middle of the night and set a deliberate fire. If there's anyone you're worried about, anyone who's made threats, you need to tell me. But what could I say? That my husband's cousin had promised I'd regret staying here? That he'd waved a $5 check in my face like it was prophecy? That he'd brought an army of suits to my door and poisoned my outreach list? None of that was proof. Just fear. I'll think about it, I said. If I remember anything. She handed me her card. Gave me a look that said she knew I was holding back.
Call me.
Day or night. This kind of thing, it usually escalates. After they left, after the sun was fully up and the smell of smoke had settled into everything we owned, I got the twins' breakfast. Caleb ate mechanically, his eyes distant. Layla pushed cereal around her bowl without lifting the spoon. Is someone trying to hurt us? Caleb asked finally. I wanted to lie. Wanted to tell him everything was fine. Just an accident. Nothing to worry about. But this child had already been forced to grow up too fast. He deserved truth, even when it was ugly. I think someone's trying to scare us, I said. To make us leave. Are we going to? I looked at him, my 7-year-old son with his father's serious eyes and a burden no child should carry. Then at Layla, who'd stopped crying but looked like she might start again any second. No, I said firmly. We're staying. This is our home. And nobody gets to take that from us. But that night, Caleb woke screaming. Nightmares about fire, about losing me the way he'd lost his father. I held him until he stopped shaking, until his breathing evened out, but he wouldn't let me leave. Just gripped my hand and whispered, Don't go. Please don't go. I stayed until dawn. Layla was worse. Wouldn't sleep in her room at all. Just crawled into my bed every night and pressed against me like she could physically prevent me from disappearing. She was 7 years old and terrified that everything she loved was flammable. I was failing them. Again. Just like I'd failed to keep Marcus alive, failed to see what he was planning, failed to protect them from the nightmare this inheritance had become. On the third night after the fire, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about Desmond's smile, about accelerant and multiple points of origin, about 6 months that were ticking away while I treaded water and tried not to drown. I needed answers. Needed to understand what Marcus had known, what he'd feared, Why he'd built all these walls around a legacy he must have known would be contested. I started searching. Through his library first, the journals I'd already read, looking for clues I'd missed. Then his bedroom, through drawers and closets that still smelled like him. Nothing. Just clothes and books, and the ordinary debris of a life cut short. But there was one place I hadn't checked. One place that always held secrets in houses this old. The attic. The entrance was hidden behind a door I'd thought was a closet. A pull-down ladder that groaned when I unfolded it, protesting against decades of disuse. I climbed slowly, phone flashlight cutting through darkness thick with dust. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. Boxes, furniture covered in sheets, the accumulated memories of generations. I moved through it methodically, opening trunks, checking behind frames, looking for anything with Marcus's name. And then I found it, tucked behind pink insulation in the far corner, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture and time. A box. Wooden, about the size of a shoebox, with a name burned into the lid in careful letters. Marcus Emmanuel Carter. My hand shook as I pulled it free. Carried it down the ladder like it might explode. Set it on Marcus's desk in the library where morning light was just starting to filter through the windows. The box wasn't locked. Just a simple latch that opened with a click that sounded too loud in the silent house. Inside, a single envelope. Cream-colored, expensive paper. And written across it in Marcus's handwriting. For Naomi. When you're ready to understand. I couldn't breathe.
Couldn't think.
Just stared at my name in his script, at the way he dotted the I with his characteristic precision. I opened it with trembling fingers. My Naomi. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're reading this in this house, in this library, then you've done something I always knew you could, but you never believed. You've stood your ground. I need to explain. Not because I owe you, though I do, but because you need to understand what you're fighting and why it matters. The Carter estate has been in my family since 1924. But it came with a cost. My great-grandfather built his fortune in ways I'm not proud of, exploiting workers, turning blind eyes to injustice, accumulating wealth that was stained before it ever reached our hands. Every generation since has inherited not just property, but guilt and power, and the expectation that we'd protect our kind above all others. I couldn't do it, Naomi. Couldn't look at you, at our beautiful children, and pretend that legacy was worth preserving. So I built something new. Something that would use this old money to do actual good. The foundation isn't charity, it's reparation. It's making right what my ancestors made wrong. But families like mine don't change easily. Desmond will fight you. Others will too. They'll call you unworthy. Gold digger. Worse. They'll use the law, intimidation, maybe even violence. They'll do everything they can to make you quit.
Don't.
You're stronger than you know, Naomi. Stronger than I was. I watched you work double shifts and come home smiling. Watched you stretch $5 into meals and dignity into days that should have broken you. You think you're surviving. But baby, you're not surviving. You're transcending. You just don't see it yet. The $5 check was my last test. I know it was cruel. I know you probably hated me for it. But I needed you to sit with nothing to really feel what that's like before I gave you everything. Because everything comes with weight. With responsibility. With people like Desmond who will question your right to breathe their air. You needed to know you could stand with nothing before you could carry something. Finish what I started. Open the center. House the widows. Teach the children. Show them that legacy isn't about blood or name or color. It's about what you do with what you're given. It's about making the world better than you found it. I love you. I've always loved you. From the first moment I saw you carrying trays at that diner, moving through chaos with grace, I knew you were extraordinary. I knew you were the one who could finish what I'd started. Trust yourself. Especially when no one else does. Forever yours, Marcus. The paper crumpled in my grip. Tears I'd been holding for weeks finally broke free, great heaving sobs that shook my whole body. I pressed one hand over my mouth to muffle the sound, the other flat against his desk where his hand had rested while he wrote this. He'd known he wouldn't live to see the foundation open. Known I'd be alone. Known I'd doubt myself. And he believed in me anyway. I promise, I whispered to his ghost, to the library, to the house that had become both sanctuary and battlefield. I'll finish it. Whatever it takes, Marcus. I'll finish what you started. The morning light grew stronger. Outside, birds started singing. Life continuing despite fire and fear and the ashes of what we'd lost. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it in the pocket over my heart. Then I went to wake my children and start again. 6 months. I had 6 months. The fire had taken the barn, but it hadn't taken me. The reporter showed up on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the fire. She came alone, no camera crew, no microphone, just a leather notebook and a smile that promised understanding but delivered calculation. Mrs. Carter? Amanda Pierce, Metro Chronicle. She extended her hand like we were old friends. I'm doing a story on the Carter estate and was hoping to get your perspective. I stood in the doorway, blocking entry. I'm not doing interviews. I understand, but the story's running either way. Her smile never wavered. I'd rather it include your voice, your truth. Otherwise. She shrugged, letting the threat hang unfinished. Behind her, a car idled at the end of the driveway. Someone watching, waiting to see if she'd get inside, get photos, get something worth printing. What story? I asked, though I already knew. She flipped open her notebook. Mystery widow claims Carter fortune. That's the working headline. See, Mr. Desmond Carter reached out to us. Said there were questions about the legitimacy of your inheritance. About your husband's mental state before his death. About a $5 check that tells a very different story than this mansion. She gestured at the house behind me. He's got documents. Witnesses. A timeline that he says proves undue influence. My chest tightened. Desmond is a liar. Maybe. But he's a liar with a law degree and a family name that goes back a century. She leaned closer, voice dropping to something almost sympathetic. Look, Mrs. Carter, I've covered stories like this before. The optics aren't great. Young widow, sudden inheritance, contested will. The public loves that kind of scandal. Unless, she paused. Unless you get ahead of it. Tell your side. Make them see you as a person, not a headline. And if I don't, then they'll fill in the blanks themselves. And people are always more creative with their assumptions than reality ever is. I should have slammed the door. Should have called Thomas. Should have hidden behind lawyers and no comments. But something in her words rang true. Silence was its own kind of testimony. And in the courtroom of public opinion, absence looked like guilt. Give me your card, I said. If I decide to talk, I'll call you. She handed it over, that smile still perfectly calibrated. Don't wait too long, Mrs. Carter. Stories have a shelf life. After a while, people stop caring about truth. They just want drama. The car at the end of the driveway pulled away after she did. But I knew what had just happened. Desmond hadn't just poisoned my outreach list. He'd poisoned the whole city. By Thursday, it was everywhere. Not just the Metro Chronicle, though Amanda Pierce's article ran front page. Secret Estates sparks family feud. But the story metastasized. Local news picked it up. Radio hosts debated it during morning drive time. Online forums dissected every detail, half the comments calling me a gold digger, the other half defending a woman they'd never met against a system designed to crush her. The school board called. Mrs. Carter, we need to discuss your children's enrollment. The superintendent's voice was tight with discomfort. Given the media attention and some concerns from other parents about stability, we think it might be best if... If what? I cut in. If my children are punished because their father left them something? No one's punishing anyone. But there are questions about the estate's finances, about your ability to provide appropriate. My children are staying enrolled. If you try to remove them, I'll have my lawyer contact you about discrimination. I hung up before she could respond. But my hands were shaking. They were coming for everything now. Not just the estate, not just the foundation, but my children. The last pieces of Marcus I had left. Thomas showed up that afternoon with coffee and bad news. I got a call from Mitchell & Stone, a firm out of Richmond. They're representing Desmond in a formal challenge to the trust. He set papers on the kitchen table. It's comprehensive. They're alleging fraud, mental incapacity, and he paused. They're requesting an investigation into Marcus's death. The room spun. They think I killed him. They're not saying that explicitly, but they're asking questions that imply it. Requesting autopsy records, financial statements, phone logs. Thomas looked exhausted. Naomi, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. And I have to ask, he met my eyes. Have you considered their offer? What offer? Desmond's lawyers sent terms. If you surrender the estate voluntarily, they'll provide a settlement. Enough for you and the twins to start over somewhere else. Quietly. No more media, no more scrutiny. He pushed a document toward me. $1 million.
Clear.
Tax-free. I stared at the number. $1 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to give Caleb and Layla stability, education, a future, without fighting. And the foundation? My voice was barely audible. Would be dissolved. The estate would revert to the Carter family trust. Desmond becomes primary heir. Thomas's expression was carefully neutral. It's a way out, Naomi. An honorable one. No one would blame you. I thought about Marcus's letter, about his faith in me when I had none in myself. About the widows he'd wanted to help, the children who needed safe spaces, the legacy he'd built not for himself, but for people the world had forgotten. About the $5 check, and what it meant that I'd survived it. No, I said. Naomi. I said no. I pushed the settlement papers back across the table. Marcus didn't build this, so his cousin could destroy it. He built it for people who have nothing. For women like me, Thomas. Women the system chews up and spits out. And I'm not walking away just because it's hard. Thomas studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, then we fight. But Naomi, we need to change the narrative. Let people see who you really are.
How?
Town meeting. Tomorrow night. Open to the public. You stand up and tell them about the Foundation's mission. About Marcus's vision. About why this matters. He leaned forward. Make them choose between Desmond's old money and your future. Between history and hope. My stomach churned. I'm not a public speaker. You don't have to be. You just have to be honest. He smiled grimly. And you have to be willing to let them see you bleed. The community center was packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, cameras from 3 local stations set up in the back. The air smelled like tension and cheap coffee. I sat in the front row with Caleb and Layla on either side, their small hands gripping mine. Across the aisle, Desmond sat with his lawyers, perfectly composed, perfectly confident. When our eyes met, he smiled that cruel smile and mouthed 2 words, 6 months. The moderator called the meeting to order. Explained the situation, the contested trust, the proposed foundation, the community's stake in what happened next. Then she called my name. I stood on legs that felt like water, walked to the podium, looked out at a sea of faces, some curious, some hostile, most just skeptical. People who'd already decided I didn't belong here. My name is Naomi Carter. I started, and my voice cracked. I cleared my throat. Tried again. I'm 35 years old. I'm a widow. I'm a mother. And 4 months ago, a lawyer handed me a check for $5 and told me that was all my husband left me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I sat in that office believing my life was over. That I'd failed. That I'd have to tell my 7-year-old twins that their father had abandoned us. I gripped the podium. But the next day, I learned the truth. Marcus hadn't abandoned us. He'd built us something. Not just an estate, a mission. I pulled out the folder with his foundation plans. Held it up. Marcus wanted to create a place for people who'd lost everything. Housing for widows. Programs for fatherless children. Education initiatives for communities that had been forgotten. He didn't do this because he felt guilty or because he wanted good press. He did it because my voice broke. Because he knew what it was like to be invisible.
To be dismissed.
To have people look at you and see less. I looked at Desmond. He wasn't smiling anymore. Some people think I don't deserve this estate. That I'm not qualified, not educated enough, not the right kind of person to manage a Carter legacy. I let that hang. And you know what? They're right. I'm not qualified. I'm a waitress who worked double shifts to keep the lights on. I'm a woman who stretched $5 into miracles. I'm someone who shouldn't be standing here. The room was silent now, listening. But that's exactly why I should be here. Because I know what the women in Marcus's outreach program are feeling. I know what it's like to be a widow with children and no options. I know what it's like to have people hand you $5 and expect you to disappear. I looked around the room. This isn't just a house. It's a home for those who've lost everything. And I know what that feels like. Silence stretched. Then, in the third row, a woman stood. Black, maybe 50, wearing a church dress and tired eyes. "I'm Dorothy Jenkins," she said. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. Been working 3 jobs to keep my kids fed. When I heard about Mrs. Carter's program, I thought finally someone sees us." She looked at Desmond. "You want to shut that down? For what?"
Pridet.
Another hand rose. Then another. A young mother. An elderly veteran. A teacher who worked with at-risk kids. One by one, they stood and spoke. Shared their stories. Chose hope over history. By the time the moderator called for a vote on community support, the outcome was clear. 73% in favor of the foundation. Desmond left without a word. But I saw his face as he walked out. It was something I wouldn't soon forget. 5 months and 23 days after I signed my name on that document, the Marcus Carter Community Center opened its doors. Not with fanfare or ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Not with politicians posing for photos or press releases carefully worded by PR teams. Just with a simple sign hung above the entrance, hand-carved walnut with letters painted gold, and a line of women holding children's hands, waiting to step into a future they'd stopped believing existed. I stood on the porch that morning, watching the sun rise over grounds that had transformed from contested territory into consecrated ground. The guest houses, 3 small cottages that had been storage buildings 6 months ago, now had curtains in the windows, toys scattered in the yards, leaves being rebuilt behind freshly painted doors. Dorothy Jenkins was the first to move in. She'd shown up with 2 teenagers, 3 trash bags of belongings, and eyes that expected disappointment. When I handed her the keys, she'd stood there holding them like they might evaporate. "This is real," she'd whispered. "It's real," I'd promised. "And it's yours for as long as you need it." She'd cried.
Ide cría.
We'd stood in her new kitchen, small but clean, with appliances that worked and cupboards waiting to be filled, and let ourselves believe that sometimes miracles were just other people refusing to give up. Now, there were 5 families. 5 sets of widows and children who'd been invisible to everyone else, but were seen here. We're safe here. We're home here. Caleb ran past me chasing Layla through the garden Marcus's great-grandfather had planted a century ago. They'd claimed it as their kingdom. Those 2 had convinced me to let them start a vegetable plot in the back corner where they grew tomatoes that tasted like sunshine and cucumbers they were inordinately proud of. "Mommy, look." Layla held up something green and lumpy. "Our first zucchini." It was the most misshapen zucchini I'd ever seen. Absolutely perfect. "Beautiful, baby." Add it to the basket for tonight's dinner. We ate together now, all of us. The families, the volunteers, anyone who needed a meal and company. Long tables set up in the converted ballroom, food that stretched to feed however many showed up, laughter that echoed off ceilings that had been silent too long. Marcus would have loved it. Would have sat at the head of the table making terrible dad jokes, would have helped the kids with homework, would have listened to Dorothy's stories about her late husband with the kind of attention that made people feel worthy. He wasn't here, would never be here, but his presence saturated every corner of this place. The tutoring program started small, just me and 3 kids from the neighborhood, working through math homework at the library table. But word spread the way hope does, quietly at first, then with gathering momentum. Now we had 12 volunteers, 23 kids ranging from 6 to 16, and a waiting list that made my heart hurt with its length. Tuesday afternoons, the library transformed into controlled chaos. Kids sprawled on the floor with books, clustered around tables debating history homework, commandeered the computers for research projects. The same room where I'd first read Marcus's journals now hummed with the future he'd envisioned. A girl named Asia, 9 years old, sharp as broken glass, angry at a world that had taken her father, had started coming 3 weeks ago. She'd sat in the corner refusing to participate, arms crossed, daring anyone to care about her. Yesterday, she'd finished reading A Wrinkle in Time and looked up at me with something like wonder. "Mrs. Carter? Can I borrow another one?" "Of course, honey. Which one?" "All of them," she'd said. "I want to read all of them." I'd shown her the science fiction section. Watched her run her fingers along spines like they were treasures. Watched her choose 3 books with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been hungry and was finally allowed to feast. That was why this mattered. The main hall had been empty when I first arrived. Just marble and echoes and a portrait of Marcus judging my every inadequacy. Now it was alive. The mural took 3 weeks to complete. I'd hired a local artist, a woman who'd lost her studio to rent increases and was 1 month from homelessness, and given her a simple instruction: show me hope. She'd painted Marcus holding Caleb and Layla. Not a formal portrait, but a moment, him mid-laugh, the twins maybe 3 years old, all of them covered in what looked like finger paint. Joy captured in oil and acrylic, stretched across the wall where everyone who entered would see it. Behind them, she'd painted shadows of other families. Mothers and children, fathers and sons, people holding each other against storms you couldn't see, but could feel. And above them all, words in Marcus's handwriting that I'd copied from his journals. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build that outlives you. I stood in front of it most mornings, coffee in hand, and whispered updates like prayers. 5 families housed. 23 kids in tutoring. 3 women now employed through the job training program. We're doing it, Marcus. We're actually doing it. Sometimes I swore I could feel him standing beside me.
Proud.
Present.
Permanent.
Above my desk in the library, the same desk where he'd planned all of this, where I'd sobbed over his letter, where I'd signed documents that changed everything, I'd hung a frame. Not the settlement offer Desmond's lawyers had sent. Not the newspaper headlines or the town meeting votes or any of the victories that looked impressive on paper.
Just a check.
$5. 2 signatures. Wrinkled from being clutched in a widow's desperate hands. I'd had it professionally framed with museum-quality glass and a small plaque underneath that read, "This is where we started. Remember." People who visited the library asked about it. Thought it was odd, maybe, to frame something so small, so insignificant. But it wasn't insignificant. It was everything. It was the moment I believed I was worth nothing and chosen to stand anyway. The moment Marcus's plan became clear. The moment the test ended and the real work began. Desmond had waved that check in my face like proof of my worthlessness. Had kept it over his heart like a promise of my failure. But I'd taken it back. reclaimed it, transformed it from weapon to reminder. This is how little they thought I was worth. This is how much Marcus believed in me. This is the gap I've learned to bridge. The pain hadn't disappeared. Some mornings I still woke reaching for Marcus, still forgot for a heartbeat that he was gone, still heard his voice in empty rooms and turned expecting to see him. Grief was like that, permanent resident, not temporary visitor. It didn't pack up and leave just because you'd accomplished things or moved forward or built something beautiful from ruins. But now the pain walked beside purpose instead of paralyzing it. Now I could hold both, the ache of loss and the joy of creating, the missing and the meaning. I wasn't just the woman left behind anymore. Wasn't just the widow who'd survived. I was the keeper of Marcus's legacy, the mother of resilience, the director of a foundation that was changing lives in ways I'd never imagined. I was the architect of a future no one saw coming. Not Desmond, who'd stopped returning calls after the town meeting. Not Thomas, who'd started looking at me with something like awe instead of pity. Not the reporters who'd wanted scandal but got transformation instead. Not even Marcus, maybe, though I liked to think he'd suspected. Had bet everything on a truth he'd seen in me before I could see it myself. 6 months to the day after I'd signed that document, I stood in the main hall surrounded by the families we'd housed, the children we'd taught, the volunteers who believed in this crazy mission. Someone had made a cake, lopsided and enthusiastic, frosted by kids who'd used more sprinkles than structurally advisable. Caleb and Layla stood on either side of me, no longer the shell-shocked children from that lawyer's office. Layla's braids were adorned with beads that clicked when she moved. Caleb had started smiling again, real smiles that reached his eyes. Dorothy raised a glass of sparkling cider. To Mrs. Carter, she said, who taught us that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who shows up when everyone else walks away. Everyone echoed the toast. Clinked glasses. Celebrated not just survival but thriving. Later, after the cake was devoured and the kids were running through the garden in the twilight, Thomas pulled me aside. Desmond withdrew his legal challenge, he said quietly. Officially. This morning. I waited for relief. For triumph. But what I felt was simpler. Completion. It's over? The contest is. But the work, Thomas smiled. That's just beginning. I looked out at the estate, at lights glowing in cottage windows, at children's laughter floating through the evening air, at the mural visible through the main hall windows where Marcus held our twins and promised that love outlasts loss. Good, I said. I'm ready. And for the first time since Thomas had handed me that $5 check, since I'd believed my life was over, since I'd thought I was worth nothing, I meant it. The end. Some inheritances are measured in dollars. Others are measured in strength you didn't know you had until someone believed in you enough to make you find it. This is a story about the second kind. Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So, do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.